Welcome back to Rapid Response, the podcast about cybersecurity threats actually hitting Australian organizations right now. I'm your host, Adarsha. In episode 1, we talked about ransomware and what it means when your business is the target. Then in episode 2, we looked at phishing and how AI is supercharging scams against Australian small to medium businesses. Today, we're zooming out. We're talking about what happens when it's not your network that's hit, but the systems around you. Power, water, telcos, banking, logistics. In other words, the critical infrastructure that keeps the world moving. The Australian Cybersecurity Centre's 2024-25 annual cyber threat report tells us a few key things. It says the ACSC responded to over 1,200 cybersecurity incidents in that financial year, an 11% increase in the year before. And the critical infrastructure made up about 13% of those incidents, up from 11% the previous year. For those critical infrastructure entities, denial of service and distributed denial of service attacks, the kind that knock your services offline, showed up in around 23% of those incidents. At the same time, the World Economic Forum's Global Cybersecurity Outlook 2026 reports that 64% of organizations are now explicitly planning for geopolitically motivated cyber attacks, such as the disruption of critical infrastructure or espionage. It also reports that less than 45% of private sector CEOs say that they are confident about their country could respond effectively to a major cybersecurity incident against critical infrastructure. So while this might sound like nation-state stuff, it lands on small and medium businesses. When taps stop running, terminals stop working, or cloud services go dark. By the end of this episode, you'll understand what critical infrastructure actually means in Australia, see how cyber warfare and geopolitics show up as attacks on those systems, understand how those attacks cascade down to Australian small and medium businesses, and walk away with a practical 30-day resilience plan you can start in your business. Let's start with the threat picture here at home. Let's clear up some jargon. When the government talks about critical infrastructure, they're not just talking about secret bunkers and blackout-resistant data centers. In Australia, it covers energy infrastructure such as electricity, gas, fuel, water and wastewater, transport and logistics such as roads, freight, aviation, communication and data centers like telcos, internet backbones, cloud providers, financial services like banks, payment systems, stock exchanges, plus sectors like healthcare, food distribution, education, and more. In short, the systems that keep your country functioning and your business capable of trade. The ACSC's 24-25 annual cyber threat report and its fact sheet, especially for critical infrastructure, highlights a few key points. The ACSC responded to over 1,200 cybersecurity incidents, up 11% from the previous year. Critical infrastructure incidents made up about 13% of those incidents, a 2% increase from 11% year before. ACSC notified critical infrastructure entities of potentially malicious cyber activity over 190 times, up 111%. For critical infrastructure entities, the top incident types were compromised asset, network, or infrastructure, which accounted for around 55% of critical infrastructure incidents. Distributed denial of service and denial of service attacks accounted for 23%. Compromised accounts or credentials accounted for around 19%. The ACSC is very clear about who is doing this. They say state-sponsored actors, cybercriminals, and hacktivists all target Australian critical infrastructure because it holds large volumes of sensitive data and it delivers essential services that underpin Australia's resilience, sovereignty, and prosperity. In other words, if you can disrupt power, water, networks, or payments, you can disrupt an entire country, not just a single business. The report also warns that state-sponsored actors aren't just stealing data. They may be pre-positioning inside critical infrastructure networks so that in a future crisis or conflict, they can enable disruptive or destructive effects on the services that keep us going. So we are seeing more incidents and a growing set of those incidents hitting critical infrastructure. State actors and cyber criminals both active in that space. and also artificial intelligence being used to scale up and speed up many of these attacks. That's the national picture. Now let's look at how this shows up in the world of cyber warfare. When we talk about cyber warfare, it can sound like a movie where there are dark rooms, glowing screens, and someone shouting, "We're under attack." In reality, it's usually quieter and more strategic. The World Economic Forum's 2026 Global Cybersecurity Outlook lays out a few striking points. It reports that geopolitics is now the top factor shaping cyber risk strategies. Around 64% of organizations are explicitly planning for geopolitically motivated cyber attacks, such as disruption to critical infrastructure or cyber espionage. It also reports that 91% of large organizations have changed their cybersecurity strategy because of geopolitical instability. And less than 45% of private sector CEOs say that they are confident that their country could respond effectively to a major cyber incident against critical infrastructure. The report also calls out that energy, water, and transport sectors are increasingly targeted in cyber warfare campaigns because their interconnected nature means even smaller disruptions can ripple out with major impacts. They give a very concrete example. In April 2025, a Norwegian hydropower dam was hacked. Attackers opened a floodgate, releasing about 500 liters of water per second for 4 hours, in what officials described as a deliberate sabotage. This wasn't just an IT problem. This incident had a physical impact. Water flowing where it shouldn't, caused by a cyber operation. Globally, we are now seeing cyber operations used to disrupt physical systems, such as power grids, dam, water networks, and transport. We're also seeing attacks timed or tuned to amplify geopolitical pressure or coincide with physical conflict, and essential services becoming a front line for modern conflict. Take the US-Venezuela standoff. In 2019, Venezuela's power grid collapsed into a nationwide blackout. The Maduro government claimed it was a result of US-linked cyber-enabled sabotage against the country's main power infrastructure. More recently, reporting in 2026 suggested that US cyber forces had carried out a targeted operation that shut down large parts of Caracas's power supply around a high-profile attempt to extract Maduro, which, if true, would mean that the US used cyber tools against Venezuela's critical energy infrastructure as a part of broader pressure campaign. Now look at the US-Iran conflict. Over a decade ago, the US and Israel used the Stuxnet malware to physically damage Iran's nuclear program's centrifuges, marking one of the first clear cases where a cyber weapon caused real-world kinetic damage inside a critical facility. Fast forward to 2026. After a round of US-led strikes on Iranian targets, the US and its allies are again accused of using cyber tools to disrupt or degrade Iran's strategic infrastructure, including nuclear and military-linked systems. In response, Iranian-linked cyber attackers and allied groups have launched waves of attacks against US-linked power grids, water systems, telecoms, and financial infrastructure, using critical infrastructure on both sides of the conflict as a bargaining chip and a pressure point. So what this shows is that cyber attacks on critical infrastructure are not one-sided. They're being used by multiple powers in both directions as a part of modern geopolitical and military confrontations, meaning that when power grids, water networks, and telecoms are targeted abroad, the ripple effects can still reach Australian businesses that depend on the same global systems. Also, Australia is not exempt from this trend. The Australian Signals Directorate and the ACSC have stated explicitly that state-sponsored actors are routinely targeting Australian critical infrastructure networks, most likely for espionage and to pre-position for disruption if a crisis ever occurs. And reporting around the 2023-2024 report makes the same point. Critical infrastructure is an attractive target because disruption there affects the economy and the lives of everyday Australians. So when we talk about cyber warfare and critical infrastructure, it's not about scaring you with nation-state buzzwords. It's about understanding that the essential services are now fair game in geopolitical disputes. And when those systems wobble, your business feels it, even if you were never the intended target. Now let's bring this home to your day-to-day world. What does all of these actually look for a 10, 50, or 200-person business in Australia? Here are three very realistic scenarios. The first scenario we have is power and internet outages. Imagine there's a sustained cyber campaign targeting energy providers and telcos. Most attacks are blocked, but some still cause short repeated power blips, localized blackouts while systems are reset, and degraded internet performance or outright ambient outages. For a small to medium business, that might mean that your point of sale terminals are dropping offline several times a day, your staff are unable to stay connected to cloud apps or remote desktops, and your remote workers or your regional branches effectively cut off from services. If you don't have a way to take payments offline, have local copies of key information, or a basic plan for how you will work if the cloud services is down for a day, then this is not just an inconvenience. You're unable to trade. Let's have a look at our second scenario, where banking and payment systems are under pressure. The AST Cyber Threat Report also notes that the financial and insurance services make up about 32% of critical infrastructure incidents by ANZSEC division. That's the largest single slice. Add that to the global trend of rising DDoS or extortion attacks against banks and payment processors, and you get periods where internet banking is slow or unreliable, card payments fail across multiple service providers, and delays hit salary runs and supply payments. On the ground for a business, this might look like a Saturday where customers can't pay by card and you have no backup, a payroll run that doesn't go through on the day you told staff, or suppliers getting nervous because payments arrived late through no fault of your own. If every critical function in your business assumes FPOS always works and online banking is always available, you're betting on your cash flow on infrastructure that is now a prime target. Now let's have a look at our third and last scenario, where logistics and supply chains are impacted. The ACSC's data shows that transport, postal, and warehousing make up about 26% of critical infrastructure incidents by division. When road, freight, ports, or major warehousing providers are hit, you feel it as late or missing stock, just-in-time delivery models breaking down, and angry customers asking why their order isn't there. If you might never hear the word ransomware in the news story, but if your main logistic partner goes down for a week, that is your problem. All the three scenarios have the same structure. You are not the intended target, but you rely completely on systems that are being targeted by criminals and nation states. If you haven't planned for those dependencies to fail, a cyber incident against someone else can stop your business cold. The goal here isn't to scare you. The goal is to acknowledge reality and then design around it. Let's talk about what you can actually do about it. Here is a 30-day resilience plan that you can adopt to your business. Think of it as, what do we do when the lifelines wobble? On week 1, map your critical activities and dependencies. Take a 30 to 90 minutes with a whiteboard, a notepad, or a simple spreadsheet. Step 1. You list all your 10 critical activities. For example, taking customer payments, fulfilling orders or appointments, running payroll, accessing key client records, communicating with customers. Then for step 2, for each activity, ask what infrastructure does this rely on? For example, power, NBN, a specific bank or payment gateway, a specific logistic partners. Then ask what happens if your dependency is down for 2 hours, 24 hours, or even 3 days. You're not building the solutions yet. You're just making the dependencies visible. This is the part of the episode that will help you most as a small and medium-sized business. Then moving on to week 2, design simple offline and manual workarounds. Now pick the top 3 to 5 activities that would hurt most if they stopped. For each one, define a plan B. This could be, for example, plan B for payments. Can you accept cash, pay ID, or direct deposit when the terminals are down? Do you have a simple way to record your sales on paper or in a spreadsheet, then batch enter them later? Also define your plan B to access to information. Do you have regular exports of key client contacts, upcoming bookings, or critical operating procedures? Are these exports stored locally and securely so you can reach them if your main SaaS platform is offline? You also need to define Plan B for operations. If your core cloud tool suddenly disappears for 48 hours, what's the minimum manual workflow you can run? This might look like printed run sheets, simple spreadsheets, or even manual check-in check-out for appointments. Document your each Plan B in a A4 size page. If X goes down, we do Y. Make it clear enough that someone else could follow it without you being there. Then on week 3, talk to your critical providers. The ACIC stresses that third-party and supply chain risk are a huge part of the threat picture. Pick your top suppliers. This may look like your main bank or payment provider, your primary cloud or line of business tool, your core logistic partner, or your MSP or IT provider. Ask them these 2 questions. The first one is, if you have a major cyber incident or outage, what happens to us? Ask them how they will contact you, what services would be affected, and what is that expected recovery path and time frame. For your second question, you ask, what do you recommend we have in place as a backup if you go down? If a supplier can't answer clearly or gets defensive, treat that as a risk signal. Use what you learn and update your Plan B pages. Then in week 4, build a lightweight incident and communication plan. Finally, you need a plan on how you and your team will behave when something breaks. Create 3 simple things. First, create an internal contact tree. How do you reach your staff if email, Teams, or your phone system is down? Your options may look like a SMS broadcast, a WhatsApp or Signals group, or an old-fashioned call chain. Then for step 2, create a customer communication template. Create short, pre-written messages for payment outages, website or online booking issues, and broader service disruption. Then for step 3, create a prioritized restart list. If multiple things are broken at once, in what order do you restore or switch to backups? For many small to medium businesses, that order is: first, payment capability, keep the money flowing. Second, phones and basic communication, you stay reachable. Third, scheduling and job management, and then everything else. The ACSC keeps saying we must assume incidents will happen and focus on resilience, not just prevention. For a small to medium business living downstream of critical infrastructure, it means that assume that power networks, banking, or logistics will go down at some point, and decide now how you will keep trading when they do. Now let's wrap this up. Here is the big picture. Cyber incidents in Australia are rising. The ACSC handled over 1,200 incidents in the 24-25 financial year, an 11% increase. Critical infrastructure made about 13% of those incidents, and critical infrastructure entities are seeing more distributed denial of service, more scanning, and more credential compromise than the average Australian organization. State-sponsored actors, cybercriminals, and hacktivists are all targeting these systems for data, money, and strategic leverage. Globally, geopolitics is a defining factor in cyber risk. Around 64% of organizations are planning for geopolitically motivated attacks, and less than 45% of CEOs feel confident that their country can handle a major critical infrastructure incident. When these attacks land, the impact cascades down to small to medium businesses. Even if you are a 10, 50, or 200 person business, you're plugged into the same lifelines as everyone else. The power, NBN, mobile networks, cloud platforms, banking, and logistics. When those come under cyber pressure, you feel it as blackouts, outages, broken payments, and late deliveries, whether anyone's heard of your company or not. The flip side is you're not helpless. If you do just one thing after this episode, make it this. Take 1 hour with your key people to write down your top 5 to 10 things that you must do to trade. Ask, what if power, internet, banking, or our main cloud tool is down for 24 hours? And jot 1-page plan B for how you will keep taking payments, accessing key info, and talking to customers. That one exercise will show you where you are fragile and where a few small practical changes can turn a crisis into a bad day you can manage. Cyber warfare and critical infrastructure attacks might sound like something that only happens between governments and big utilities. But every Australian small to medium business sits downstream from the same attacks. You don't get to choose when they hit, but you get to choose how ready you are when they do. I'm your host, Adarsha. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.